Says the family knew Eric was hiding something. In no way did we feel he had done it. So we felt that he knew something, maybe something had threatened him. That's why he wouldn't tell. It's exactly what Smith's neighbors, John and Marlene Heskell, who were friends of the Smith family, also believed. After the murder, Smith spent nearly every night at their home. Eric asked me, what would happen if it turned out to be a kid? And I said, I seriously think that they would need some psychiatric help. Oh, okay. And then he would walk away. And DNA testing. He wanted to know what that would show. Gradually, details began to leak out about the crime, and Marlene's friend called with a new theory about the murder. She said, we think it's a kid, and they don't like bananas, because whoever killed Derek had squashed the banana. An adult would have just discarded the banana. They wouldn't have squashed it and made a mess. Marlene Heskell launched her own investigation into the murder. I went up to the store and I bought ice cream and nuts and syrup and bananas, and I brought it home and asked everybody if they wanted sundaes. Well, they all did, said Marlene. Eric was going to have the nuts and syrup, but he didn't want banana. No, I don't like bananas. And I called Nancy and said, Eric doesn't like bananas, and I'm scared. 5 days after he was killed, Derek was buried in his baseball uniform, and just 2 days later, his killer confessed. Wow. The Roby family has already learned in the most brutal way that nothing can be taken for granted, so they sent a letter to the parole board along with a home video showing the short life of Derek Roby. It upsets me that we have to beg for them to keep this killer behind bars, said Doreen. My biggest worry is that I still have a 12-year-old. There's certainly enough things to worry about with an adolescent other than the fact that there could be a killer running loose. I don't like to say that very often, but I don't want to scare Dalton. But that's the way I look at it. The uncertainty also weighs on Tooney, the man who convicted Smith. Will the parole board see things differently than the jury? In a lot of ways, it's like having the trial all over again. When Eric was asked why he killed him, he said that he lost control. His mother said, I asked him why he did it, and he was just saying, I don't know, and he cried. The jury heard that as a toddler, Smith threw temper tantrums and banged his head on the floor. He had speech problems, he was held back at school, and he was relentlessly bullied. When he asked for help with his anger, his adopted father did not seem equipped to give it to him. He was really upset. He was crunching his fists and shaking and told me that, Dad, I need help, said Ted Smith. I said, hold it. When I got angry when I was your age, I just grabbed a bag in our barn and started beating on it till I was too tired to do anything else. Then Ted said, I heard a door shut, and I turned around and he was gone. And as I got to the window, he was coming back to the door, and he was calm, and I looked down and noticed his knuckles, and his hands were kind of skinned up and bloody, and I asked him what happened, and he said, I hit the tree a couple of times and seemed to be okay. The psychiatrist, Dr. Stephen Herman, diagnosed Smith with intermittent explosive disorder and uncontrollable rage, literally deadly rage and anger. After the episodic rage, the child may appear to be normal. But the prosecution's experts said it was a rare disorder that was rarely seen at Smith's age. Smith was subjected to extensive medical testing from specialists from both sides. They examined brain function, hormone levels, and found nothing to explain his violent behavior. But Dr. Herman still believed that there was something wrong. Something happened to his brain, but we can't measure it. Now, here's the mitigating factor in that. Smith's mother, Tammy, said she took a drug to control her epilepsy while she was pregnant with Eric, the drug tritione, and it can cause birth defects. And Herman says he's not suggesting that the drug would have caused Eric to be violent, but he does believe the drug caused Smith's ears to be low set and caused his developmental delays, which profoundly affected his self-esteem. He says Smith's pain and rage overwhelmed him. That is devastating. We know that. We know that a child being bullied at school is devastating. We know that a child who has developmental delays, they are, sometimes they're very hypersensitive about it. And if we have their peers who are allowed to bully them with no consequences, that child being bullied feels like the whole world is against him. So the more we read about Smith, the more you read about Smith, you kind of put a picture together that um, even though he was so young when he killed, he was driven to that because he was bullied, because he was angry, because he had explosive behavior. Not unusual for a serial killer to have those same emotions, but certainly very unusual for a young person like this to act out on it at that young of an age. And I do think that there's a really good chance that the drug caused his developmental delays, caused him to look a little different. And I think that, as I've often said, if he was bullied at home or bullied at school, or those people failed him. If he was bullied mainly at school, then his teachers failed him. And I know it's difficult. It's difficult to say what you would do in those situations, but the fact is we have to figure it out. We have to figure it out. We'll really never know exactly what happened unless technology becomes much, much more advanced, which is not unusual because, technology continues to get better every single day. There may come a time when they're able to look at the brain and say, this is that gene, or this is what happened, or we can see the way that the brain didn't form, or we didn't have enough gray matter in that frontal cortex. We may be able to be that specific, which will help us prevent these things from happening and help that child, lead a successful, productive, nonviolent life. It's really sad when I look at these lists, and it's sad enough that you have a list of all these people, and every one of these lists has someone new on it. Many of them are on there 2 or 3 times, on the list, on each list. So they might be on 3 or 4 different lists, but every single list has a different person in it. So there's just such an extensive list of these young children. It's crazy. Graham Young is on this list. He was fascinated with poison from a very young age. He poisoned his several classmates' sister, stepmother, and father. His stepmother actually died. And then he was sent to a psychiatric facility with other troubled individuals who had committed crimes. He was released 9 years later. But during that period, he poisoned several staff members and killed one of his inmates. He was then sent to prison to spend the rest of his life. And this was during the early 1970s. Definitely the definition of a serial killer. A poisoner, that is also a very brutal way to kill somebody, depending on, and it really does depend on what, the chemical is that you're using. He used thallium and, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but antimony, and I've heard of thallium, yes, but not the other one. And this was, of course, in London, Bovington, United Kingdom. He died in prison in 1990. So he killed in 1962 and then again in 71. Crazy. So they call him the compulsive poisoner, the teacup poisoner. He was 14 years old when he killed his family, released as a reformed character, and then back in for life when his workmates died after drinking the tea Young had made. So he was released by the judicial system and then murdered again. And you know how I feel about that. Graham Young was born in Neasden, North London on September 7th of 47 to Fred and Bessie Young. His mother developed pleurisy during pregnancy and died of tuberculosis 3 months after her son's birth. Fred was devastated by her death, and the infant was put into the care of his Aunt Winnie, while his elder sister, Winifred, was taken in by her grandparents. The young Graham spent the first 2 years of his life with his aunt and her husband Jack, and became very close to them. When his father remarried in 1950 and reunited the family again in St. Albans with his new wife, Molly, Graham showed visible signs of distress at being separated from his aunt. He went on to become a rather peculiar child, solitary in his habits, and made no effort to socialize with others his own age. So guess what? Here's another case of a child being obviously being removed from his mother because she passed away. Of course, it's devastating no matter what the child's age is because of that bonding. If they had, it seems like from what we're reading that he had attachment to his mother. He was devastated by her death. Then he had an additional attachment to his aunt and was with her for years and then removed again. We cannot keep doing this to children. You see this in foster care. You see this, the judicial system. I understand that you want children to ultimately be back with their families. In a perfect world, I agree with you. But if this child was thriving with his aunt, leave him alone. Leave him alone. I feel so strongly that this is one of the reasons that you see many serial killers who will focus on women that look like their mother, or another member of the family who maybe they wanted to be attached to, but wasn't. I mean, you see that so often. So often. It is definitely a sign. I think that attachment issue is so incredibly important, and it can be so incredibly devastating to children. I mean, that's that trauma that we talk about so much. You want to talk about if there's like if I were going to put like different traumas and rank them, from 1 to 10, I'm going to say that attachment is number 1. It's just remarkable. And you see that right here. And of course, this was years ago. This was in the 70s, 50 years ago. And we didn't have the knowledge that we have now. But that's the good news. We do have that knowledge now, and we can make a difference. So, interestingly enough, when Graham became old enough to read, he favored sensationalist nonfiction accounts of murders, and Dr. Crippen, the infamous poisoner, was a particular favorite. By the time he reached his teens, he had developed an unhealthy fascination with Adolf Hitler and took to wearing swastikas, extolling the virtues of a misunderstood Hitler to anyone who would listen. He also read widely on the occult, claiming knowledge of Wiccans and local covens, trying to involve local children in bizarre occult ceremonies, which involved sacrificing a cat on one occasion. The subsequent disappearance of a number of local cats around the same time may have pointed to a more regular occurrence of these sacrificial ceremonies. Academically, his only interests were chemistry, forensic science, and toxicology, but the limited school coverage of these subjects forced him to advance his studies through extracurricular reading. His father encouraged him, buying Young a chemistry set, which absorbed his attention for hours at a time. By the age of 13, Young's comprehensive knowledge of toxicology enabled him to convince local chemists that he was, in fact, 17, and he procured a dangerous quantity of the poisonous antimony, digitalis, and arsenic for study purposes, as well as quantities of the heavy metal thallium. Keen to put his knowledge of poisons to the test, his first victim was fellow science pupil Christopher Williams, who suffered an extended period of vomiting, painful cramps, and headaches due to the judicious administration by Young of a cocktail of poisons that left medical experts baffled. Williams was lucky to survive, probably because Young couldn't fully satisfy his scientific curiosity. Monitoring the illness of his victim when he was sick at home wasn't feasible, so he decided to focus on a group to whom he had unlimited access.